So a lot of people appear to have liked the last video that I did, so what I decided to do is go right to where I found the video I was talking about on the Vince DelMonte Facebook page and see if there's anything else that I could talk about. So I found another one where they're trying to explain why dips are more for the shoulders and the chest than they are for the triceps. So he gets this guy Brandon Green again, I guess who's a muscle specialist, he calls him, an RTS instructor, some guy I've never fucking heard of, and they tried to use what's called a moment arm to explain and build their case. But once again, the information is incomplete. There's more to the story, so I'm going to talk about this real quick. Now, if you want to know what muscles are working when you're doing an exercise, then biomechanics will tell you that. And biomechanics is very simple to understand, but most people are very intimidated because they see it as something that's very sophisticated and complicated. But in my opinion, the reason for that is just because of the terminology that's used. If you use the right terms, you can generally connect with most people and they'll be able to understand biomechanics. Now, if you understand the universal law of levers, which only has two variables, the lever, which is your bones, and the direction of resistance, which is always going down if it's your body weight or a free weight that you're lifting, then it's pretty easy to understand which muscles are responsible for producing force to perform the direction of effort for whatever exercise that you're doing. But when you do a compound movement, it can get a little bit more complicated, and that's where a moment arm comes into play. And a moment arm is also very simple to understand, and I will explain that to you. But before I do, let me give you the definition that this Brandon Green guy gave when Vince asked him, and Vince introduces him as someone who's smarter than himself. So this is the definition that he gives. He says, we're going to talk about this thing called a moment arm, and honestly, we're not going to have enough time to get into the details of it because it's a pretty complicated thing. A moment arm is the shortest distance between a line of force with a perpendicular relationship to an axis. Then he says a bunch of other shit, and he goes on to say, in the RTS program, we explore this in depth. It's a long conversation. It's a long conversation. I can sum it up in about one sentence. You know what a moment arm is? The length between the joint and the direction of resistance acting on that joint. That's it. Not really that long of a conversation to me. Now, as it relates to dips, let's take a look at this real quick. So we've got Rudy Poo Candy Ass doing a dip. So in this position, that's the top of a dip. We got his shoulder, his upper arm, his elbow, his forearm, the bar that he's holding onto, and his legs hanging below. As Rudy Poo lowers himself into the bottom of the dip, we see that the shoulder joint moves forward in relation to where his hand is, and the elbow joint moves backwards in relation to where his hand is. If we zoom in over here, here's where the moment arm is. So look at the purple line. The moment arm is the distance between the joint and the direction of resistance acting on that joint in a perpendicular axis. So which arm is longer here? That purple line or that purple line? This one is. So that would indicate that the stress being imposed on this joint is relatively greater than on this joint. So therefore, they suggest that doing dips on the bars is more for the chest and the shoulders. But this doesn't tell the whole fucking story because the smallest, weakest muscle is under a relatively greater demand. You're using your body weight. So even though the lever is more parallel to the direction of resistance and the moment arm is shorter, the muscles responsible for producing force to perform the direction of effort are also smaller. So that makes up for these biomechanical differences. And that's one thing that they don't explain. And the definition of the moment arm, like what the fuck was that, man? It's so simple. I summed it up in like 7 or 8 words. That's why you keep putting this shit out. I'm going to keep exposing it. You like the information, share it. Click the fucking button at the bottom of the screen that you're looking at, and I'll keep bringing you the best information you're going to find as it relates to training to build muscle.